Good afternoon. I'm Jane Vossler, and I'd like to welcome you to this travelogue on behalf of the Community Senior Center of Richmond, Huntington, and Bolton. It's good to see you here. And I'm very happy to have Sherry and Rich. I'm very happy that they volunteered to do this program for us, and they're great world travelers, and so I'll turn it over to them.
Okay, I've just got to get on this slide show, just a minute. I'm waiting for this to click off so I can get to the expand it a little bit. Okay, I think we're all set. Do you see the cover sheet, Ethiopia
Yes.
Travels? Okay, great.
Okay, so this is Rich. I'm going to do the introduction. I want to thank everybody for coming, and I want to credit Sherry with being the photographer and the person that also went through and arranged the 40 million pictures into a manageable number. So with that, we will continue. Sherry and I went to Ethiopia, and you might wonder, why did we go to Ethiopia? It was our 5th trip to Africa, and Africa's a huge continent. It's bigger than North America, and there's just so many different Africas. And Ethiopia has a long history of monumental civilization, where they had a ruling group, and they built monumental architecture. And so there's a lot of stuff to see because they built in stone. So we flew from Dulles to Addis on Ethiopian Airlines. We actually stopped in Togo. Most people haven't been to Togo, but we have, at least the airport. And we spent a few days in Addis.
Explain the map.
Oh, okay. I'm supposed to go back and explain the map. Okay. Well, from the map, we flew to Addis, which is in the center. And then we spent some days in Addis, and then we flew up north with a G Adventures group to Lalibela or Lalibela, Axum, Simeon Mountains, Gondor. And we came back to Addis, and then we had a private tour that went south down to almost to the Kenyan border. And that was to see the tribal areas. So this is the more detailed map. And Ethiopia, like much of Africa, is tribal areas that European powers drew lines around and called them countries. And right now, of course, in Ethiopia, the Tigray province, which is where a lot of this trip was, is basically being attacked by the central government and by Eritrea. The Amharas and the Tigrayans are fighting. The periods of stability are not long in Ethiopia. We had a good period of stability. So this is Addis, which is an African city. It's got high rises, it's got slums, it's got busy streets. So we went to the National Museum, and there were a couple of skeletons that we wanted to see. You don't actually see the skeleton, you see a replica of it, but they were found in Ethiopia. And there's Ardi, which is a 4.4 million year old hominid that's there. And there's Lucy, who's more famous, was certainly found about 20 years earlier. They're all in the Afar region of Ethiopia, the Awash River Valley, which is very good for preserving skeletons and is very good for being dated because it has a lot of volcanism. And here's what Lucy is perceived to have looked like as she was walking across the savannah. There was an ethnological museum, and we went to see Haile Selassie's bedroom. The Ethiopians believe firmly that up till Haile Selassie, their leaders were descended from Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, and that Haile Selassie was the last of that line before he was overthrown. And now they have a quasi-democratic government. Picture of Haile Selassie.
Hi, this is Sherry. In addition to going to the museums in Addis, we did go to churches and other sites on our own. We did a day-long bird trip outside of the city. There are a number of things to do, but because we had so many pictures, we had to take some of them out and give you an overview. From Addis, as Rich said, we took a G-Adventures trip, and it was flying to the north and then driving around and then flying back. And as he mentioned, we did a G-Adventures trip. They are a company that is out of Canada, and we had gone with them before on a trip on the Amazon. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But first of all, the flight was fascinating. We took Ethiopian Air, and the country from Addis to the north is very mountainous, and you can see there are flat spots where there is a lot of farming. They're basically an agrarian economy, and then developments. But you can imagine driving this area. You have to go from those high tablelands down into the valley and then go up to the next high tableland. Here's another picture from the airplane as we're landing that shows the terrain and the higher mountains. So we were met in Addis, and our full group is here. It was a group of 5 men, 9 women, comprised of couples and singles. G-Adventures is kind of a fun company to go with because it's not just older Americans like companies like Overseas Adventure Travel. It included young people as well as people our age. And there were people from Canada, the US, and then 1 each from England, Belgium, and Germany. And Norway too. So it was a fun mix. There was 1 Black woman, and she is kneeling, and she was more of an oddity for the Ethiopians to see than the rest of us. She happened to be 6 feet tall, very attractive, and so people tended to mob her rather than the rest of us. So our first stop was in Aksum. And Aksum is a center of a great ancient civilization that until recently I knew nothing about. So it was an interesting place to visit. In Aksum, there's a World Heritage Site. It was one of 6 that we visited in Ethiopia. I think there are a total of 9 World Heritage Sites in Ethiopia. So there's a lot of interesting history here. The picture in front of you is the main Stella Field in Aksum. There was an ancient kingdom, and this dates from the 3rd and 4th century AD. They had these tall pillars. The one in the foreground fell, maybe construction. The one that's in the background that is held up with supports actually was, I think people need to mute their mics. We're hearing some background noise. But there is a pillar supported stele, and that stele was actually removed by the Italians at the beginning of World War II. And then just recently, it was finally returned by the Italians to Ethiopia. This shows that fallen pillar. You can see how intricately it's carved. And there's a church across the street that we'll visit later. This is a close-up of the stele. And Rich and I are birders, so we would take pictures of birds, and we also did a little birding on the side. And these kestrels were on a support holding up that Italian stolen Stella. We also enjoyed seeing wildlife, and these gravette monkeys were hanging around. Our group went into the countryside outside of Oxum, and here is, oh, I think we missed one.
No, this next.
Okay. Okay, that's next. This is another Stella Field, and here people are, they've just harvested, and I think the next picture will be of the harvest, and they're separating the wheat from the chaff. And in this case, the wheat is actually teff, an ancient grain. And here you can see them, they're cutting the grain by hand. Many of them have small machetes, and that's how much of the agriculture is done. You can see cows in the background. And every country has its own way of having haystacks, and that's what they do in Ethiopia. So the church that the main church in Oxum is very important to the Ethiopian Christian Church. This is called the New Church of St. Mary of Zion. It replaces many other older churches, and the original church is said to date back to the 4th century AD. The Ethiopian Cross is displayed in a variety of different types throughout the country. This is the cross that was on top of this particular church. Ethiopia believes, or at least the Ethiopian Christian Church believes, that inside this building is the Ark of the Covenant, which is the box that is said to store the stone tablets with the 10 Commandments. And they also believe that this city was where the Queen of Sheba lived. And there's a place in outside of the city that was called the Queen of Sheba Bath. So after visiting the various sites in Oxum, we got on the road, and we were in the van, and lots of driving on this trip, but the driving was interesting because of the scenery and what we saw, the way people lived. So you can see the curving roads going up and down the valley. Here, I just took pictures as we were driving along through the window. This is sort of a typical scene, people living near the road, all farmers. People use the rivers for drinking water and also for washing clothes and washing themselves. Here's some children washing clothes. And Ethiopia over the years has had a number of wars or fights with adjacent countries. And throughout the country, when we traveled, we did see refugee camps that were funded by various international groups. And this was one of those that we saw along the way. In this city or town, we stopped for lunch, and this was sort of a typical town, electric lines running through, and you can see the satellite dishes and the gorgeous mountain scenery in the distance. It was really scenic. And this is a typical meal in Ethiopia for lunch and dinner. It's made out of injera. It's a flatbread kind of thing made from teff, with sauces, a variety of different kinds of sauces, of lentils, meat, and vegetables. And people just sort of mix it all together and peel off a piece of this flatbread and stick it in their mouths. Unfortunately, I didn't really like Ethiopian food, but there was enough other variety of food to get by. This was a nicer looking place. They used whatever materials are available, and they had a lot of rock here and wood. Beautiful mountain scenery, and to take advantage of every possible place for a farm, they do a lot of terracing. The roads were not always good. This is as we were driving up into the mountains where we're staying overnight. Our destination was this lodge in the Simeon Mountains. And we went to this area because it's known for wildlife. And we did a short trek one day. And here was a view from nearby. You can see some people off down in the field. And what they were looking for were these. They're geladas. It's a species of old world monkeys found only in the Ethiopian highlands. They're sometimes called gelada baboons, but they're not really baboons. They're a separate species of monkey. And the adults have like a red breast, so they're sometimes called bleeding heart geladas, especially the males, which you'll see. Here, it was so much fun to watch all the little youngsters hold on to the parents and walk around. And here's a close-up of a little one. And that's a big adult male with his harem. It was really fun to see these. So now we've made our way to another historic city named Gondor. And this is the view of the city from our hotel room. We went out walking in the morning, and everyone at this hour is going to work. This is sort of a typical scene. It's mainly women in this picture. They are wearing shawls, which is typical. It was a little cold in the morning, and those will come off during the day. Here you can see a busy downtown street, sort of late afternoon. Lots of taxis and different kinds of vehicles, and then lots of people walking. Gondor is famous because it is the site of the royal palace enclosure. This was our second UNESCO World Heritage Site. This is Emperor Palisades, I don't know how to pronounce the names, palace, and it's in this capital city. It was the capital city for this emperor in 1636, and at that point he started building a complex, lots of castles surrounded by stone walls. This was a castle by another emperor, and it happened to have been damaged in World War II when the Italians held Ethiopia. This is another view of the grounds of Rich and me. And I've included this picture because it shows how the country still relies a lot on manual labor, not only for farming, but for other things. Here, these women are sitting there using mallets to create small pieces of gravel that would be used along the walkways in this complex. So they just sit there and pound, pound, pound. Okay, sorry, we jumped ahead somehow. Okay, back here. So also in Gondor, there are a number of famous churches, and this is a church that was begun in 1690s and reconstructed in the 18th century. And it's famous because it's a holy site, but also because of the paintings inside. A lot of the Ethiopian churches, Christian churches, are decorated by religious paintings, and here you can see Christ and the Holy Trinity. And then the whole ceiling is covered with these cherubs. It's very well preserved. From Gondor, we did another road trip and stopped at a town that was having a market day. It was pretty fascinating to walk through here. You see all the people out for the day, and in front of you are all the people selling different kinds of grains. It was also a livestock market, and people enjoyed showing off, their animals, and they liked these kids liked getting their picture taken. I would show them what it looked like after I took the picture. This woman is holding a baking stone that is used to cook the flatbread. And behind, you see these things that are big scales, and that's what they use to measure big barrels or bags of grain. Here you can see, animals being sold. And then just a street scene, a woman walking with the grain that she bought on her head and carrying a young child on her back. More pretty scenery, long drives though. And our next stop was Lake Tana. And here is our group having lunch on the lake. It was a scenic spot, and we were going to be taking a boat ride in a minute. But we looked around, and there was this beautiful bird. It's a immature malachite kingfisher. Okay, so on our boat ride on Lake Tana, we encountered this man who was trying to make some money by, when the tourist boats show up, they will try to throw feed to feed the white pelicans, and then the tourists give them some money. It was kind of an interesting sight, as you can see. Lots of pelicans with big mouths. The reason that we went out into Lake Tana was not only to enjoy a boat ride, but to visit some monasteries on the island. And this is one of the two that we visited. And the monastery dates back to 14th century AD. And these monasteries are all the Ethiopian Christian monasteries. Inside, beautiful old paintings, Madonna and Child. And this is St. George the Dragon, Hunter, I guess. Dragon Slayer, sorry. And also in the same area is the Blue Nile, which is a major tributary to the Nile River that flows north to Egypt. We took a short boat ride across, and then we walked over to where these waterfalls were. It was a very pretty sight. And then right near there, we took a further walk, and this is how they get across, these rickety kind of bridges over the valley. And this is one of the people in our group who happened to have to share the narrow walkway with a person coming through with a mule, it looks like. So we stayed in a city called Bahir Dar, and took a tour one evening of a sort of a typical village in that area. And you can see that that's their housing. I guess it's mud or cement. But while visiting that site, we saw another pretty bird, a double-toothed barbet. And we also visited with some people here, and they showed us how they make their injera bread over a wood burning fire. And it's also a coffee producing region. So we watched this woman pound, the coffee bean into coffee, and then she brewed that, and people were able to sample. Then we continued on, and this is, some of the housing that we saw along the way. And, in the towns, you'd see all kinds of people walking home to and from farming, and then animals blocking the street. It was always an interesting event to go out for a ride there. More pretty scenery. And now we have made it to our last stop on the G-Adventure tours. But not least, this was a place that we wanted to see in Lalibela. It's an area that is a famous UNESCO World Heritage Site for its 11 rock-hewn churches. And here we see Ethiopian Orthodox Christian priests entering into the World Heritage Site. According to tradition, the king who reigned in the period of 1189 to 1227 commissioned all these churches, but it was probably many of his heirs that finished them. So it's a fascinating place. All of these churches are underground, and so what you see in the distance is way up with the trees is the ground level, and then these churches were dug out of the ground. This is the world's largest rock-hewn church, and it has 37 rock-carved columns. That's Rich in the picture there with his big camera. Here is another church. This one is dedicated to the Virgin Mary, and it's where they have large pilgrimages. We went inside all of these churches. I took, probably 1,000 pictures that day. I'll only show very few, but this gives you an idea of what some of these churches look like inside. Carved ceilings, painted, different draperies, and then a variety of paintings inside. And inside each of the buildings, there would usually be a priest. And this one was very photographic and was carrying their version of an Ethiopian cross. But what bothered me is that some of these places, like one of the churches here, was males only. So this male from our group was able to visit that. That was also the case at the church in Oxum. There were portions where the females were not allowed to go. The area with the churches in Lalibela, or Lalibela, it's pronounced both ways, to get around, there are all these different tunnels. And so here you see us walking down a tunnel and through a tunnel and then through an arch to other sections. Here is Bet Emmanuel, which people think was a church that was used by the royal families. The inside of this. This is the Nuns Quarters, and amazingly, there are nuns that are still living here. I mean, it's just a little mud hut and nothing else. But the most famous place in this area is this church, and it's 15 meters high. It's carved in the shape of a Greek cross. And the way to access it is sort of in the back on the right. There is sort of a ramp stairway that goes down. It wasn't super impressive inside, but it's an amazing building, an amazing site. And of course, we had to have our picture taken there. So that's the end of my portion, and Rich will now take over and talk about our visit to the south.
Okay, I'm going to throw in a couple of sort of tidbits about Ethiopia. One is that the reason that they could have the rock-hewn churches and the reason they have all the fossils is because of huge amounts of volcanism. Ethiopia is referred to as the roof of Africa. The volcanic layers are over 15,000 feet thick in some areas. It carves nicely. That's what they carved down into to make the churches. And the highlands in Ethiopia are what caused the floods of the Nile, or when the Nile flooded before the building of the dam. More than half of the water volume of the Nile River that flows through Egypt came from the Ethiopian highlands, from the Blue Nile, although the White Nile gets all the fame coming out of Central Africa. But the heavy rains in the highlands do cause the major flooding in the Nile River. And so with that, oh, and the other thing is that the Ethiopians are intensely proud of the fact that they were never colonized. Ethiopia was sort of given to the Italians when the European powers divided up the spheres of influence, but the Ethiopians didn't really have anything to do with that. They didn't accept it. And the Italians never were able to rule them except for that short period in World War II. So going south, we actually end up getting about 10 miles from Kenya and about 10 miles from South Sudan. It's not Ethiopia, it's tribes. And the government tries to teach them the common language of Ethiopia, which is Amharic, but otherwise they live as tribes. And the colors that are shown on here that show the tribal areas, that's just where they happen to be mostly, but sometimes a tribe will decide to move into some other tribe's area and they'll fight it with each other. The government has nominal control down here, but I'm not sure it's significant. So where we're going to go is we're going to go see the Dorze, the Ahri, the Merci, the Hammer, the Dassinatch, and the Arbore tribes. These are our driver and our guide. They did smile a lot. The guide spoke pretty good English. The driver spoke decent English. He didn't do it much because that wasn't his place, but we could talk to him. There was another Stella Field, which is the Tia Stella Field that's about 700 years old that we wanted to stop at because if it was a UNESCO World Heritage Site, we figured we should see it. And the grave markers have something to do with how many people that guy killed. So they put different swords on them. In the south, there's a lot of donkey carts. And of course, there's the taxis and everything, but they carry big loads. And I do make the comment that decent sized loads are carried by little girls, really big loads were carried by women. But if it was a huge load, the men didn't carry them. They put them on the backs of donkeys or in a cart. The women, a lot of people wear the head coverings. It's not all Muslim. Some of it is, but the Ethiopian Orthodox wear head covers as well. From a religious point of view, Ethiopia is quite religious. There are about half of the people are Ethiopian Orthodox, about 30% Muslim, and the others are variations. Some of it's tribal religions. Some of the houses as we're heading to south, traditional circular African house. The tribes have their different styles. They typically have a distinctive hat style. And our guide always knew which tribe somebody was from by what hat they were wearing. But the whole family's traveling on this horse cart. This was a city on the way down there, and which was a fairly, modern city. They get less and less citified as you get further south. The first tribe we went to see was the Dorze. They build their houses in the shape of an elephant's head. And actually, when they have a fire in the hearth, the smoke comes out of those eye holes or ear holes, whichever those are. I think they're supposed to be eye holes up top. But those are the eyes of the elephant. You see the trunk. The houses do get infested with termites about after 10 years, and so they saw off the bottom portion and make it a shorter house. And when it gets shorter, they make it an animal house. And when it gets really short, they make it a grain storage house as the house sort of disappears into the ground. The interior of one of the Dorze houses, they were known as weavers. They were selling cloth to tourists. Yes, the men. Sherry and I each got to try some of it. We did poorly. And they sell the cloth to either other tribes, to their neighbors, or to tourists, but mostly to other people in Africa. We stopped for drinks with the tribe. This tribe is more built into the fabric of Ethiopia. They actually have kids that have been to the schools in Arbore Village, and they have a couple of kids that have been to the universities. So that's me on the right, and then there was the white woman that's also in the picture was a Belgian woman that was on her own private tour, which ended up getting modified because the area she was supposed to go to was unstable. So she ended up with us for a few days. We've stayed in a resort in Arbor Village that was, it was like a 5-star resort. I couldn't believe it, but that's where we stayed. They told us we were at the best place each town. Some of those best places weren't quite like this. We went out on a boat ride on Lake Chamo, which was interesting. It was mostly to see wildlife. There's African fish eagle, some carmine bee eaters, hippopotamuses. Oh, I thought my wife was telling me to speed up. She was telling me to slow down. There were Nile crocodiles that I believe were as long as our boat. And I couldn't believe the boat was basically parking on top of them, but it did. And I was just, don't upset that croc. But we headed on, and we had stopped at this lodge in Kanso for lunch. We're going to stay here later. But the bottle, of course, is Coca-Cola. And I have my Coca-Cola all the time. So we moved on to the Ahri Village, which is much more of, it's still a tribe that is part of the main culture of Ethiopia. They're on the roadway, and they have rectilinear houses made out of concrete. They essentially, this is our local guide, and all the others are the women that are in the village, and they are always willing to sell you stuff. They have the stuff out for display, but they weren't particularly aggressive about selling it. This woman was she making coffee?
No, distillery.
The what?
Distillery.
Oh, sorry. This is the still. It's a distillery. That's why she's smiling. And of course, the kids are carrying the loads. And that's the common way that they move stuff around, is it's carried by people. This is our little cabin in Jinka, which was perhaps the least elegant of the places we stayed, but it was fine. The biggest problem was there was a church nearby that was having a revival of some sort, and they would be chanting starting around 4 o'clock in the morning, and we could hear that faintly in the background. The eastern black and white Columbus monkey. So we got to the next of our villages, and now we're getting into the National Geographic kinds of villages. This is the Merci Tribe. Now, I'm supposed to warn you at this point that some of the pictures do seem to be like the 1960s National Geographics. The people are not fully clothed by Western standards. We won't be offended if you leave, but there's nothing truly X-rated. It's just topless women and a young boy that's not wearing anything. But that will be coming. So the Merci are, these are young boys. I think they're boys. They have the big earplugs. They also have lip plugs. The women. This is the one of the women that they have their bracelets, but They start off when they're a kid. They put a small plug in their lip. They also do it with their ears, and they just keep doing it bigger and bigger and stretching the flap of skin. They don't normally go around with all of the plugs in place, but for special occasions, they will put them in place like this. And it's a beauty mark. It's a little different, but that's what they do. And the women typically have infants, young children that are with them. It's a pretty high birth rate. And of course, they are willing to sell you a lip plate if you want to buy one and try to put it in. This woman doesn't appear to have followed the practice. She doesn't have a flap of skin on her lower lip. And my wife is pointing out that the military is there. There are guards. The area isn't unsafe, but it can be. Young boys, they have a circumcision rite where for about a year they are loose in the countryside, just like in Kenya, and they are sort of separate from the tribe and living by themselves. In Jinka, there's a lot of the towns, not that many towns, but they have market days, and those days are when everybody from the neighboring towns, the neighboring tribes, comes in to sell and buy. And there was a vegetable market and grains. And this is their guide walking along. And then there was a second market that was cattle and goats. And, you know, mostly the men are over there looking at whatever goats they want to have. This was in the Hammer Village. This was a young boy that was going to have his coming of age ceremony. He is going to run naked across the back of 4 bulls. It's called a bull jumping ceremony. And his female relatives will wish him good luck by being whipped by his friends. It's a rather different ceremony. But these are the women, and they get struck with sort of flexible versions of what they're holding. My wife's waving at me. I don't know what she's saying. But anyway, they look like they're herding the bulls to get them ready for the bull jumping. Well, what they're really doing is keeping them stirred up. And they just keep dancing and singing and jumping. And they'll go marching right through the bulls, and the bulls are just milling everywhere. And then they line up 4 bulls, and this guy has to run across their backs 4 times. This guy had a different approach. He would jump up on the first bull, step on the second bull, and then leap bulls number 3 and 4. And he almost went off the 4th time across, but he did make it. And since he made it, now he's eligible to get married. If he didn't make it, he would have to come back again next year and try. This is our lodge in Termi, which was, we ended up with the army staying with us the second night because the governor was meeting there. Our room with the mosquito net. This is the Rift Valley. This is the sort of the standard scenery where there's volcanic mountains and then the lowland, and it's very arid. Abyssinian ground hornbill, white-bellied go-away bird, a malachite sunbird. Sunbirds are their versions of hummingbirds. A masked weaver, a vitaline masked weaver. And now we're in the Hammer Village, which is the same tribe that had the bull jumping. And these women are trying to sell stuff. You would always buy a little something. It was sort of part of the entrance to the village. Looking inside one of the Hammer houses, they keep their animals in a wood stockade, wood and branches. This is where we're getting really close to Kenya. We're going to take a boat ride across the Omo River. This is the houses of the Dassinatch Tribe, the ones that have metal on them, heat up like an oven in the daytime, so they sleep in them at night when it's cold, because it is a desert. During the day, they mostly spend time in a covered area where they have some local brew. This is me and our local guide and one of the local kids. At one point, he informed me that I must be dead because I was 74 years old, and he didn't know how old they were, but he knew nobody lived to be. I said I was 72, and he said no one lives that long. The Dassinatch women, most of them have an infant, and it's dressed like it, the other places. This is the village. They have a school, and some of the kids go to school, and basically they're trying to teach them Amharic reading and writing because these people grew up with tribal languages here. This is the Amharic alphabet, which the Ethiopians tell me has 31 letters. It's got 31 consonants, but they write them with 7 different ways to indicate the vowel that goes with it. The government tries to do some things to stop some of the old practices. The early marriage for the girls, they try to suppress the female circumcision. They have very limited luck with those. A termite mound. Now we're going to go to Arbore, which is also close to Kenya. A camel on the road. Vulturine guinea fowl. The Arbore Village is sort of like the Dassinatch Village. Their houses are a little bit different. Their dress is a little bit different. The women wear a lot of beads. And I don't think they dance all the time. They do dances when the tourists come. And the women that are not married or that are too young for marriage have shaved heads. So we have our guide and our driver as we're heading back. They're having the injera, which is what they always ate. A red cheek cordon bleu, a red-billed firefinch. We went to the Kanso area, which is a World Heritage Site because of its terracing. They have a village with stone walls. And this is one of their sites to indicate the family and the people that he's killed as well. And the animal pens. And a young woman carrying a load of looks like a kind of sugar cane. On the roads, that's where people walk. That's where the animals walk. That's where the cars drive. We had a thick-billed raven. This was our best bird, an African paradise flycatcher, which showed up at our lunch spot. And another view of it. We were supposed to stay at a different place this night, but we had to move to the hotel we're going to because the place we were had election violence. So we stayed at a resort on this lake, and the guy knew we liked birds, so he got arranged for us to have a bird ride. And of course, we took pictures of birds on the property, the speckled mouse bird, the marabou stork, and the sacred ibises, African jacana. A hammerkop is very distinctive African birds with the hammerhead. White pelicans again. White-breasted cormorants. black-headed heron. And there was also a church a monastery out on the island, which we went to. Again, painted with all the religious iconography. A plant that looks like a cactus. It's actually a euphorbia. It's a convergent evolution with the cactus. Heading back to our hotel, back to Addis. And my wife has grabbed the computer from me.
Oh, and it got stuck.
Do we have any more pictures?
Yeah, there was. Hi, are you there?
Yes, we're here.
I thought I had one additional photo that I can't seem to get. So I'll see if I can find it. And it was a fact sheet, but we could take questions in the meantime.
Sherry, this is Karen Costello. The stone churches that were built, that were carved out of the ground, was there any kind of refurbishing done on those? The paint colors were very good. Were they original? Were they preserved?
Oh, I think they continue to refurbish.
Okay.
All of the old churches, they refurbish them whenever they can.
Okay.
Sherry, I think I recognize a couple that you were traveling with because I went to Brown and I graduated in the 80s. And there was a researcher who did like oceanography and his wife was a lawyer. Is that who that couple is?
It is.
Okay, that's pretty small world because I saw them and I'm like, I think I know them. The lawyer wife worked with my brother. And I actually just texted my brother to ask what their names were because I can't remember. But I haven't heard back from him yet. I don't know if you remember. He was a very nice guy. I worked in a genetics lab, so I would be in the basement scrubbing out test tubes, and that's where his lab was located. So we would chat sometimes, but I didn't work with him.
His name is.
So that's a pretty small world.
It is.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Mark Burtness, definitely. Yep. Okay, very cool.
He's we enjoyed them.
Nice. And I had a question. In some of the iconography in the church, I was surprised that a lot of the people represented were like not quite white and not quite black, sort of just like a coffee color. Did they mention why? Like, I would think that they would be darker if they were representing their own people, but they were sort of like a blend. Did they address that at all?
No, they really didn't. But people in Ethiopia are varying colors as well. So maybe that's why.
But they are mostly black and they're certainly proud of it. I mean, they tell you that the Ethiopian flag has 3 colors and one of them is black for the color of our skin. And then the other 2, I forget what they are. And what
yeah, I just read a book called Passing by Nella Larson, and it has to do with the shade of your skin. So I was curious.
I have a bit of input, which is OAT is pushing Ethiopia trip and says they have online a top movie about Ethiopia. I haven't watched it yet, but I thought I'd watch it after I saw your slideshow.
Okay.
Sherry, what time of year did you go?
That's available to all of you.
We went to Ethiopia in November of 2019, and I think we were gone a total of 3 weeks. And it was fascinating to see the two different parts of Ethiopia because, they were very different. And somehow I had spent a lot of time preparing a fact sheet on Ethiopia, and it didn't seem to be part of the slideshow, and I couldn't resurrect it. But if anybody is interested in knowing more about Ethiopia or getting a copy of the fact sheet, you can email us at Larsen, LARSEN 007, think James Bond, at AOL.com.
Peggy has a question.
Yes.
I think her mute is on.
Peggy, I think you're muted. In the meantime, someone asked in the chat, what is the process you use to take photos? Do you check with your guides, the people directly? Do you pay them?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. In the north, we would more take pictures of larger groups or would ask for permission. In the south, our guides had arranged with each village what the rules were. And if we wanted to take pictures, I think we had to pay a certain amount per person. It was all sorted out in advance.
But it was like each of us paid $3 for a virtual camera permit. And because they had probably in the past that each person of which you took a picture wanted money. And the tourists got into debates of how many people were in the pictures and who got money. And so they've gone to a system where they pay the village leader that we can take pictures, and then we're just free for it. We just do what we want.
So it's hard going to places like this. You feel sort of a little bit like an ugly American, taking pictures of these people. But on the other hand, the money that we paid them helps them survive and maintain their own individual cultures. So that's how we rationalize it, and we hope that was the right thing. Don't know.
Yes, I think I'm unmuted. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Okay, so nice to see you, Sherry and Rich. It's great.
Hi.
Hi, I was curious on the churches. I was quite fascinated why they were built underground. I understand, Rich, you were saying that the volcanic matter there is so deep and it's great, but is that why they did it? Just because it's harder to build it up and it's just easier to build it down?
Boring.
I think they did it because they could. I don't think it was for defensive reasons, for instance.
Right.
It was just, I don't know if it was because it was unique or they could carve rock. They could carve volcanic rock, which is pretty soft. And so I never asked why.
I heard that one of the reasons was to protect the churches. They could fight against it by preventing them access.
Yeah.
Don't know. We don't know. Good question.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking though, based on what you said, it might be, it's certainly easier, instead of moving the rock, you just carve it out and leave it as is and make your shapes where they are, which was to build down, to carve down into the ground as opposed to harvest the rock and build it up into piles. Maybe that was the reason. I don't know. It's really fascinating. That's amazing. Those are amazing. I've never seen anything like that. Very different than the pyramids, right? That were above the ground. I became fascinated. I was really happy to see you were doing this. My dad was a pilot and did a lot of flying in Ethiopia. And some of the first aerial photography, he was the pilot for some of the first aerial imaging that was done back in the day, in the kind of late 60s, I guess it was. I was just very little then. But so when I was growing up, we actually had some special things from Ethiopia in our house. And he's since passed away, but I have his 16 millimeter movies that he took of his time in Addis Ababa and time on the Nile and different areas. It's very special, very special. I think it's wonderful you went there. And I did have one more question. Sorry. As you were traveling through that beautiful tabletop land and you saw the agrarian countryside landscape, what were they mostly farming? Was it kinds of grains or?
Yeah, it is teff, which is sort of unique to Ethiopia. It's sort of a wheat. That's their main crop. It's what they make the injera out of.
Okay, what is it called again?
Injera.
It's TEFF.
Oh, teff. Okay.
Yeah.
And the thing is, you could watch them doing it, and I would say, I read about that technique in the Bible. I mean, they're making the sheaves of, not wheat, it's sheaves of teff. They're stacking them up. They're threshing them by throwing it up in the air to separate the wheat from the chaff. It's the same technique that people have been using for 4,000 years at least.
Sherry, I know you said that you weren't fond of the Ethiopian cuisine, but I volunteer with a mentor in South Burlington by the name of Alganish Mikael. It looks like Michael. And she does Ethiopian cooking classes and actually sells the food locally. I don't know if people have seen it in Front Porch Forum, but the injera is really good. I don't know if she uses teff or something else, but it's actually pretty good. It might be worth trying to see if her version is better than the one you had. And also, my husband said that he noticed in Lalabella that they did a 60 Minutes piece not long ago on that site. I don't know if you saw it a few weeks ago.
No, but wait, we'll have to look.
Yeah, where there was like a Greek cross. I don't know. It was one of your flags. Yeah.
Great. Thank
That's
you.
the Church of St. George.
Yeah.
Brenda, I actually I sent the link to this meeting to Alganish and Adbi, her husband, in case they were free today, but they weren't.
Oh, that was good.
Yeah.
Good thinking.
Yes. You can find them, you can find Alganish all over the place these days at CVU, Ollie, and then right there at the cider mill near where she lives.
Yep.
She sells her food often there. I think she gets it from Boston. The teff.
Yeah.
You can buy. I bought teff probably at City Market.
Oh, there you go.
I have never used it. It's still in the fridge.
She gets really big quantities at a time too, I think. Yeah.
This is a little package.
So any other questions?
Yeah, Sherry, this is Karen again. We were in Egypt in February of 2020, and they were talking about possibly going to war with Ethiopia over the damming of the Nile and the water. Were you hearing anything about that while you were in Ethiopia?
Yes, we did see some dams as we were flying over, and they really need to have a good water supply, and they have flooding, and so they want to control the Blue Nile. And Ethiopia's gone ahead and built this dam, and they've been filling it. But at the same time, there hasn't been any agreement. Egypt and Sudan are very concerned about it because they want to have continued water flow because it's essential for drinking and their farming. So there's still disagreement, and who knows what's going to happen.
Right now, Ethiopia is spending more time thinking about their internal war than fighting with Egypt. It's an unfortunate situation in that area right now.
So we probably wouldn't want to go to Ethiopia right now. I guess it would depend upon where you go. The southern areas seem to be relatively calm, but we were happy to find a time that they weren't at war with someone. And we were lucky to go to Egypt, for example, just before the Arab Spring happened. So I don't know, maybe we're the harbinger of bad, bad luck.
I hope you don't bring Botswana bad luck when you finally get there.
Yeah.
If they find out, they might not let us in.
Yeah.
That's true.
So any further questions?
So do you,
Yes.
this is Marion. Do you know where the source of the Blue Nile is? When I was in Burundi, they took me to the source of one of the Niles, and I don't remember whether it was the Blue Nile or the White Nile.
It would have certainly been the White Nile. The source of the Blue Nile is in the Ethiopian highlands.
Okay, great. Thank you.
It's upstream of that falls we went to. I mean, there are other tributaries, but the Blue Nile comes in, I think, at Khartoum, but it's basically all the water came from Ethiopian highlands.
What was your
Thanks.
currency? What was your currency?
The U.S. dollar, but their currency is called a birr or burr. It's BIRR. But U.S. dollars they're readily taken. Although if you give them small bills, individuals can have trouble converting them. But it's easy to convert. It's easy to get money. Go to an ATM and get your money in birr.
What was the ratio of US to birr?
I don't remember
The what?
the exchange rate. Don't remember.
I don't. I think it was about 100 birr was $3, but I think that's what it was. But I may be wrong. I know in Ethiopia it wasn't expensive to go out to dinner.
What time of year did you travel and was it comfortable?
Yeah, it was November, and it was a good time to be there. It wasn't, well, up in the mountains, it was quite chilly, but I think that's probably the case all year round. And in the south, it was warm. So we just had layers.
But Ethiopia is just a little bit north of the equator, so it's not terribly seasonal in terms of the temperature.
But we like to get away from Vermont in November.
Did you notice, were there any, was it buggy, or were you were mostly in cars? Did you do any good long hiking or feel?
Yeah, we had a couple of days where we did a fair amount of walking, and I don't remember any bugs.
I don't
Yeah,
remember bugs.
yeah. It looks.
But in the south, on the other hand, we did have mosquito netting. But I don't believe we ever saw one.
We didn't have mosquitoes.
So maybe it's a different time of year.
That's great.
Yeah. And the funniest thing was the fabric in the one mosquito netting picture that I showed had a cross-country skier on it. And they must have just had surplus fabric that was sent from the U.S. or somewhere to Ethiopia, and it was, basically white with these red cross-country skiers on the top. And, they thought this was appropriate to use for netting.
Fun.
I'm glad you noticed that, Sherry. I would have noticed that. That's great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Wonderful. Amazing. It was fun to get some names down too, to look up a few of those places. So, yeah.
Thank you very much, Sherry and Rich. It was a great show. Really
Thanks for having us, Jane. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye all.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you.
Bye.